Hello, reader friends.
Hello, reader friends.
Hello, reader friends.
we always just throw that out there and then hope people catch on. Yeah. We're the Young Gang Book Club, and if you're here, you're our reader friend.
Yes.
Very cool. Today we have Alicia Elliot, author of our November book. Ready, Megan?
I'm ready.
Let's go.
Oh, here. I have mine, but it's like the Canadian version, so it's red.
Yay! Love it.
Very cool. Do you have this too? Do they give you other copies?
No, I don't have a copy of that one, so I just have to have like the Canadian one.
All right, guys. Who's going to send Alicia a copy of her book?
Yeah, I probably shouldn't be like calling out my publisher and being like, "How dare they? They didn't even send me a copy of my book." But I don't know. Well, I'll ask eventually.
That's fine. Hello.
Hello, people in the chat. If you're here, say hi. Say hi to Alicia. Say thank you for coming.
Hello.
Where's the chat comments? I don't know how to word this thing. Okay.
Yeah,
We are going to talk about the book. We're going to encourage you to buy the book and read the book. Megan and I have bought the book and are reading the book, and we love the book.
We love the book, yes.
So, thank you so much, Alicia, for coming.
Yes, it's so nice to be here. Thank you. I actually love YouTube so much, so it's like exciting for me to actually be on like a YouTube live. I'm like, oh my god! I watch a lot of makeup bloggers and then like drama channels that follow the makeup bloggers, so it's very meta. But, so I never thought I would have a chance.
That's so cool. You're gonna have to like send the link out to people and be like, I was on YouTube.
Exactly. I'm gonna like hold this so close to my heart.
Oh, that's amazing. We're very happy to hear that. We're honored that we are having you on and you're in our space, in our reader friend space. So it's great. Yeah. So yeah. Thanks everyone for being here. Thank you for saying hi and checking in. So this book, A Mind Spread Out on the Ground. Alicia, can you like give us the intro to like the book, what it's about, and why you wrote it?
So I guess I'll just kind of like talk a little bit about like how it came to be. So when I was just like a little baby writer, I definitely thought that, you know, like a lot of people that, you know, you're not really a real writer unless you write a novel, because at the time, you know, in a lot of creative writing courses, they have you writing like poems or writing short stories, and neither of those really like you can publish books of them, and obviously they're important as well, but they're not like the ones that are treated as serious literature in that way. And definitely until I took a course that included creative nonfiction, I didn't even really like think that it was a thing. Like I didn't realize it until basically, yeah, one of my courses in my creative writing undergraduate at York University kind of the author was very interested in creative nonfiction. And so as soon as basically the summer hit, I picked up Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking from the closest library, and I read it, and I was just like, it was, I don't know if anyone has read it, but it's basically just about like Joan Didion, who's like an amazing writer, basically went through a horrible tragedy where her daughter kind of fell into a coma because she had this medical emergency. And while her daughter was in a coma, her husband of years, like decades, they were together for like, yeah, like I want to say over 20 years at least, maybe even 30 years. He just dropped dead one day. And so she was just like, almost like, I don't know what to do. What is happening? Like, I don't understand this. I don't know how to move through the world anymore. And so she ended up writing this book, The Year of Magical Thinking, talking like basically it's investigating grief. And it also brings in memoir, like different memories she had of her daughter, of her husband, and also just like she would look at sometimes different ways that different cultures interacted with death. And you know, like all of this stuff. So she was kind of like weaving all of these things about history and her own personal life and everything. And I was just like, this is the coolest thing. Oh my God. And so basically I started kind of trying to like slowly write some stuff. And eventually the first essay in the book, the title essay, A Mind Spread Out on the Ground, I wrote that one specifically because like I was depressed, and I was one of my like literary idols who I had met basically was editing this all indigenous issue of a literary magazine, and she had heard me read from another essay that's in the book that's called I think it's called, what is it? Oh my God, is it called? Oh yeah, it's called Wait. So that was the one that I read from. I just read a little bit from it, and she was like, "You should submit something. I'm editing the creative nonfiction of this issue," and I was just like, I don't know. But also, I was like, I can't disappoint her, so I was like super depressed. But I was like, I'll just write about being depressed. That's all I am. So I don't know. And basically, from there, kind of just started not really knowing what I was writing about, and then started just like, I don't know, just started weaving things in. Talked to my sister who was at the time learning Mohawk, and asked her specifically about what Mohawk words would be for depression, and she gave two. And I don't want to slaughter the language of my ancestors, so I'm not gonna say them, but I did actually get my sister to like do like phonetically, because for the Canadian audiobook I read it, so I had to have it like accurate. But basically the two words kind of, it's Mohawk is a really metaphorical language, so it the two were kind of like a mind suspended or a mind like in the air, and then a mind spread out on the ground. And to me that kind of like you know, as I talk about in the essay a bit, it kind of talks about almost like a before and an after of like, if you're looking at it. And I was thinking of it almost like fruit on trees, like an apple or something like that, and it's in the air, and it's you know, just like hanging there, and then if it falls on the ground, it's just gonna go poof, and like splat and you know, bruised or whatever, depending on like what it's gonna land on, you know what I mean? So like there were all these things that kind of reminded me of depression and language and stuff like that. And so anyways, as I was kind of, I ended up winning a national magazine award in Canada for that essay. And as I was like going, one of my friends was really, her name is Eilette Spari. She's also a writer. She's brilliant and just really kind. She like took my headshots for me for free because she knew that I was like a little baby writer and I had no money. And as I was talking to her while she was taking the photos, she was just like, "So are you going to write a book of essays?" And I was just like, "Oh, that's a good idea." I have like a few in the pipeline, and I know that I could write more. And then my poor husband, he had always been like, "You know, you should write a book about your life." And I was like, "A memoir? Oh God." No offense to memoirs or anything. Well, I don't know how you cannot be offended by that, I guess. But but anyways, I just found that like, I've read a bunch of memoirs and they all follow the same kind of like structure, or not all of them, but like so many of them. I was a child, and then this happened to me as I was a child, and then I became a teenager, and then this happened as I was a teenager, and now I'm an adult and I'm still alive, so the book is over. And I was just kind of like, I don't like, that doesn't do it for me. It doesn't feel like it has the same kind of like, because I tend to think a lot, maybe too much, I would say. And I like to kind of a like different, I was thinking around a lot of Haudenosaunee philosophy, which, you know, has really actually influenced the US in particular, and the creation of democracy in the US. I don't know how many are aware of that, but yeah, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy was one of the main like influences on the way that American democracy became like so different from what it was in England and everything like that. And our Great Law of Peace was kind of like heavily influential on the U.S. Constitution, but they messed things up a lot. So we can get to that later. But anyways, but yeah. So anyways, it was just basically the philosophy around kind of like what Seven Generations is in particular. I'm not sure how many people are aware, but basically the idea is just kind of like you are at this moment in time the product of decisions that were made 7 generations in the past by your ancestors, and the decisions that you are making now as an individual are going to affect 7 generations into the future. In terms of like whether you have children or whether you don't, it's going to impact 7 generations into the future. For example, like, if we're talking about things like oil or, fracking and stuff like that, we can say, oh, wow, we're going to have so much money right now. But like what's going to happen 7 generations in the future, that's not a renewable resource. We don't have more dead dinosaurs lying around to like ferment for years and years and turn into like basically black blood for the earth. You know what I mean? Like we don't have that. It's a finite resource. So what's going to happen when that's all gone? And what's going to happen when our waters, we can't drink from them? And what's going to happen when the air is such, like in places like China where they had to wear face masks before COVID because of the air pollution? You know what I mean? Like these are the kinds of things where it really grounds you. And so a lot of what I was writing was me trying to look at my life, not just as an individual like thing, but as a basically like something that was influenced by generations in the past and as something that's going to affect generations in the future. So to me, as I was writing it, I was kind of thinking about it as my life is kind of almost like a door that I can open to look into the wider world of history, into the wider world of philosophy, of all of these things that we are talking about. And just as my life can do that, anyone's life can do that. You can, if you stop and think about, okay, I am, and you can list all of these like the identity markers you want to list. Say you're like cis or trans, or you're straight or gay or bisexual or queer or whatever. All of these things, but that situates you within a particular context. So, say for example, you're an Indigenous person, then you're situated within the context of being Indigenous for hundreds of years in whatever like country that you're living in. And what that means in terms of the things that your ancestors have had to deal with, and how that has carried on and been passed on to so many different generations until you are right now at the precipice of history at the present moment. So basically, that's kind of like where how I was trying to write most of the essays was to try and make it so that I can say, okay, here's me. Let's zoom out, and let's zoom out, and let's zoom back in, and let's zoom out, and like so that we can see how these things kind of connect, and how everything is connected, really. If you really want to get into it like that, but I think I've talked so long. So.
Well, I'm glad that's where you got to, because I think that's been on my mind as I'm reading this. And I think that's exactly what you do so brilliantly in this book. And like,
thank you.
Like the thing that if I were to go to a friend who hadn't read it before, I'd be like, this is like there's a few things that personally I love about it, but that's a big thing. I think almost you just as a reader and a human being on this planet, that I think we all can appreciate about a book like this is that it does that more than like, I think like what you were saying, the memoir does, where it's like, here's just my life.
Yeah.
And like on a plate, like here it is, but that's it. Where it's like, you have like the chapter I'm reading now is about food.
Oh yeah.
We wanted to talk about I took out my bookmark. What's it called?
34 grams per dose.
34 grams per dose. So
yeah.
This is a concept we've kind of gotten into before. We read this book called Tyranny of Kindness by Teresa Finiciello, that was actually published in '93. So it's one of the, mostly we've been reading old, new books, but that also gets into the concept of food. And so anyway, like how it is related to poverty and and just all of the kind of like things that about it, the hard truths about it that no one seems to want to face. And so that book approached it in a very data and statistics way, but you have a personal story, and so it kind of like encompasses both things, where you do present facts, but you also tell your story, and it's in this like essay format. And I really think that's so effective and beautiful to read too. It's like heartbreaking as it is.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
I just definitely, I think that one of the things when I went to university, and I just got a BA, which I know I just got a BA. There's a lot of people who, who strive to reach that. I'm not trying to, say it's just a BA, but I'm saying that only because I know a lot of academics who have gone further into masters and PhDs and stuff like that. And they're people who I look up to in a lot of ways because, the main reason that I didn't want to go any further was because even within my bachelor degree, even though I was technically only taking English and creative writing, but I was also taking a lot of courses around gender. I took, and I talk about this in the book, a diaspora literatures course, which actually like really, really was brilliant and like opened my eyes in a lot of ways. But I knew that I was taking like, as part of at York, they make you take like a class in sociology, a class in humanities and stuff like that as part of and science as part of your degree requirements. So I went to different courses, and one thing that I kept finding to me was that I was reading these, like, as you get further and further into, post-secondary or university college, and they start making you read this theory, it gets to be so dense. And while I understand that, they need certain language to talk about specific things, I also just kind of felt like sometimes I would be sitting there reading these, like a sentence over and over, like 10 times, being like, I don't understand what this means. Like, if they mean this, why don't they just say it? Why does it have to add like 20 more syllables where they're not necessary? And then I'm just like, oh my God. So like, you know what I mean? Like, I just want to read it and see what it says. And so for me, one of the things is that also, like the further you go into the academy, it seems like, they call it the Ivory Tower, I think for a reason, is, it gets up to be so high. And like the people on the outside can't climb those walls. The people on the outside often are just left, and they're all of a sudden, when you're in the academy, it's just so insular. You're talking to other academics. You're not really, and for the most part, sharing your research with the people you're researching about. And to me, that I found that really ridiculous. Like there were a lot of things that I researched and I was like, why doesn't everyone know about this? And like the reality is they write it in such a way where it becomes very inaccessible, and you have to almost like, oh my God, take like so much time to pull everything apart. And so for me, one of the things that I was like, I just really think there's so many really interesting things that are being discussed in the academy and in these studies that I was reading while I was writing the book. And I was like, I need to make this so that anyone can read it. Like, I want to be able to write a book where I can give it to someone on my res and they will understand what I'm saying. Because to me, like when I was writing the book, a lot of authors I know talk about how they don't think about their audience at all while they're writing, which is an interesting thing for me, but I question that. But for me, it was at the front of my mind. I was just like, I need to make sure that this book is going to be relevant to specifically Indigenous women, Indigenous girls, Indigenous Two-Spirit, and Indigenous queer people. Like, I wanted it to be something they could pick up, they could read, relate to, and understand. And I wanted them to feel held as well, because, there are ways to write about trauma that are re-traumatizing, and there are ways to write about trauma that I think acknowledge it, but also try to take the steps back to also care for people. And I think that was something I was primarily concerned with, was not only like taking these big abstract ideas like racism, like colonialism, these things that like when you say them, you assume that everyone is talking about the same thing, but you don't know that. You know what I mean? Like some people, like, I mean, I feel like when you talk to certain people, especially in the States, and you say, this is racism, and they're like, no, it's not. And you're like, what do you need to, like, I mean, what do you think racism is? You know what I mean? And so when we take those big abstract terms and then, you know, root them in the concrete, in the physical, in things we understand in everyday interactions, then that's where they become real for other people, where they can meet you on the same playing field instead of being up in the air where no one knows what you're talking about. When you say this word, they think it means this, then this other person thinks it means this, then this other person thinks it means this. And these people down here are like, what are those words? How many syllables? What? So like, it makes it very, very difficult for all of us to kind of meet and talk about things and be vulnerable together as well. Vulnerability was something that I was very, very, that I thought was very important for me to show in the book, because I just felt like so many people, especially when you start talking about like stats and stuff, they're like, keep me out of it. I don't want to be involved. Don't criticize me. Don't look at my mistakes. Don't do any of this stuff. Let's just look at the facts. But that's not how it works. You know what I mean? Like in the reality, in grounded reality with people, that's not how it works. So I was like, you know what? I need to be vulnerable with readers so that they can hopefully see that and say, you know what? It's not that scary for me to be vulnerable. She was vulnerable. I don't think poorly of her, so maybe other people won't think poorly of me if I choose to be vulnerable and share things that are, you know, that are important for these kinds of conversations that we're having in the world at any point, but particularly now.
Yeah. I think honestly, sorry, I'm repeating.
Oh no, go ahead.
I think honestly, you do a really good job of doing that. And actually, Kateri and I were talking about that before you got on. We were both saying, like, we love that you put those facts in there and then connect it to something that's either your story or, like you were saying, you're not just telling your story, you are telling a lot of different stories. You know, you are zooming outside of yourself. And it kind of makes it more, it kind of creates a bigger sense of empathy, I guess, at least for me, because I can see the bigger picture and making those big picture connections. And I'm also empathetic anyways. I'm not saying I have no empathy. I have too much sometimes. But it does, I think, for people who maybe don't think about things outside of themselves, that having those other facts in there. We were talking about one of our favorite is when you put in the facts about dark matter, the discovery of dark matter, and then you're linking that to some other big picture thing. It's just so, it makes it that much more beautiful. And I think it does make it that much more beautiful for people who maybe only like the facts. Or for people who do find science beautiful. And then, hey, if you think science is beautiful, here's how it can translate into real world context or people's lives. And I think you do a really beautiful job of doing that. That's something that I've been really enjoying this entire time as I'm, reading it.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you.
I really love what you're saying about thinking about your audience, making the book readable for the people that you're writing that you care about, and like kind of the subjects in a way. And I also really like what you're talking about with the Ivory Tower. And I think I didn't bother reading my.
Well, yeah.
Will,
I was gonna. Yeah.
Will is a beautiful poet, and so
yes.
It goes to show. I think Megan and I were both English majors, and we both write, and so I feel like we're all in a nice little camp right now.
Yeah. You say you have a BA. I always say that we have a badass in English. Like we're all badasses in English.
And we, Megan's in grad school now, but not for you're doing public health.
Yeah. But when you were saying, oh, all the facts, I don't know what that means in these theories. I was like, I felt that. I feel that. I have several books that I'm reading right now that I'm like, do you want me to understand this? Am I allowed to
yes,
to read so that I can finally get to this? And once it's honestly like, and I think coming from like within the English and like creative writing and even literature world, is that a lot of it can be kind of, and not kind of, a lot of it can be pretentious.
Yes.
Really. And it's like it's like this little club and we don't want you to be in it. And you know, Kateri and I think had a discussion way back at the beginning of the book club talking about how the things that are seen as classics aren't even like fun to read. They're like hard to get through, but it's just the pretentiousness of it. I can get through this book.
To a certain extent, some of them, you know, or some of them are racist. You know, like why are we still reading this stuff? It's like actually.
Yes, exactly.
It's a classic. Like, why can't this be something that, you know, we're reading in class? Because this is it's not just like interesting and easy to understand. And I'm not just saying this like compliment you. I would say this not to your face too. But you know, it's just stuff like this where you've obviously put a lot of time and a lot of, like you were saying, vulnerability, and it's still technical. Like it's still technically good as well. You know, you are still a very talented writer. And I think sometimes people think, oh, if I have to be interesting or I have to be vulnerable, I can't also be a good writer. And that's just, I mean, that's not true. You know, like you can still be technically skilled and also still be vulnerable and also still make it interesting to read.
Yeah.
It's funny. Oh, sorry.
This is a really cool little rabbit hole we're going down.
It's funny that you say that because there's something that I when I talk, I don't know, when I read other books, I find that like there is a shift happening where when I was trying to get into MFA programs, they did not let me in. They were like, not you. So I was just like, okay, I guess I'm just gonna keep working at Starbucks and then write on the side. It's funny because, you know, when I was doing that and I was reading these books by the people who are in charge of these programs, a lot of it I found, and I don't want to say that like, when I say like it felt very masculine, I don't mean that it like I say that in that the way that masculinity is kind of perceived as being like a withdrawal of emotions, of only being rational, of all of these things, right? And so I found that like a lot of the books that I was reading, I was not connecting with them because I was just like, it doesn't, it like it's technically good. Like I can say like these were beautiful sentences, they're very well written. You know, but at the same time, I always kind of felt like it feels like the writer doesn't know what they're trying to do with the book. And and as I started getting like, and as I was working on my book and then talking to other people on panels and stuff like that, because, you know, once you have a book, you get to go up to like literary festivals and hear other people talk about them. And you're like, okay. Or you're like, really? So like, you know, as I was kind of going around, I got a lot of like, because, you know, it's interesting what other writers say when you ask them about their books and how little sometimes it seems like they actually think about what they're trying to do with the work or what they are, or, you know, what I say this to writers when I'm trying to work with them, because I feel like as a kind of like a mentor or a teacher, I feel like a lot of writers write and they don't know who they are. And I know that sounds kind of like weird and abstract and everything, but I really do think that a lot of people don't know who they are, what they stand for, what they want to put out into the world. And then they just write these books and, you know, you can look at them and say like, this is well written, but at the end of it, there's no beating heart, there's no soul. And, you know, it's hard to actually point to something within those books and say, this is the problem. If you just fix this, then it's okay. But like, the more that I have gotten to like read these books and then talk to the people or hear them talk about their work, I'm just like, they don't know why they're doing this. They're just writing it because they were like, I want to be a writer. Like that's fine. But, you know, when you're like, because anyone can create art for whatever reason they want to. But for me, the stuff that really resonates is the stuff where you can tell that someone is really kind of looking inward with regardless of whatever they're writing. It could be fiction, it could be nonfiction, it could be poetry, it could be screenplays. but where it seems like they're trying to figure out something about themselves, or they are trying to figure out something about the world and their relationship to the world that is difficult, that is not easy. And when you see someone coming out the other side of that in a book, it's just something that feels different. It hits different,
Mm-hmm.
And so, as I was kind of writing this book and I was reading other Indigenous writers' books, I found that, a lot of, in particular, Indigenous women were doing that work. And so, I found myself reading their books and being like, yeah, it feels like they know what they're doing. They know who they are. And it's so strange to say that, but like, I will talk to other writers, like, little baby writers, and say, like, you need to figure out who you are, because you're going to get rejected. You're going to get, you're going to get rejections. You're going to get, you're going to get editors who are going to push you, because they will have a totally different vision of what you are doing. Even though you're both looking at the same thing, they'll say, no, you need to cut this out. And this is where the good stuff is. And you'll be like, that's totally changing the entire thing. How the fuck can you say that? And they could say that because they're the editor. But if you don't know who you are and what you're writing and stuff like that, you can get lost in that. You know what I mean? You can get you can make it so like, okay, I guess they're the editor, so I'm going to listen. And then you publish something you don't believe in. And when it comes out, you're like, I don't feel happy. I don't feel like this is what I wanted. I feel like this is what they wanted. And it just makes you feel not great.
Yeah. So I have a question, and then we have a comment that we want to get.
Yeah.
And it's just based on what you just said. Like, did you actually experience any of that with this book? Like, with how was it with her?
Yeah, actually, there's one essay that is in the US version that's not in the Canadian version. I swapped one out because one of them was kind of more about the Canadian industry, and I felt like the US industry for Indigenous writers is totally different. And so I didn't want to bring that into the, I just decided to switch it out. And so the essay, Two Truths and a Lie, is about basically, it's about truth and lies. It's about reality TV. I talk about Vanderpump Rules. I talk about Donald Trump, all of this stuff. And then I also talk about this book that by Sheila Heti called How Should a Person Be? And when I read it, it was very, very important to my literary development when I was younger. But then she wrote a book later called Motherhood. And it's all about her as an older, rather affluent at this point, white woman who is trying to decide whether she wants to have a child. And me, I was 17 when I got pregnant. I had my baby, and then my husband's mother watched our child from as a baby while we went to school in Toronto. Every single weekend I was coming back down to try and still keep a relationship, but it was very fucking difficult. And or sorry, I didn't mean to swear on YouTube.
You're good.
But anyways, but it was very difficult. And so, and the whole time I was trying to write while being a mother and knowing this, and trying to keep it secret sometimes from some people because they would judge me, or you know what I mean? And so my experience of motherhood was not the experience of motherhood that she was interested in and that she was writing about. And I ended up having a section in there that was talking about that, but I ended up pulling out because I had the piece published with a literary magazine, and that editor was like, this is the part I wanted you to talk about. I want you to talk about this. Let's take out the part about Trump. Let's take out the part about where we're talking about reality TV and all of this stuff. And I was like, that's the essay. That's the essay. If anything, the part where I was writing about motherhood should have been in a different essay, because I was talking about different things and I swapped it out. It's much better having that out. But I knew that because I've been writing essays for so long, and I was like, I could feel it while I was reading it that it pulled away. And then she was like, no, this is the essay. And I was like, no, that's not. That's like a section of the essay that is pulling the whole narrative in another direction that feels weird then when I come back here. And like the fact that she couldn't see that made me very frustrated. But I was like, no, I can write that as a different essay if you want later, but I'm not going to, that's not going to be how it's going to go. And so she did like relent, but I mean, it was one of those things where you have to know what you're writing and why you're writing to make sure that you are advocating for yourself, because that's your byline. It's not going to have the editors. Like the editor's not going to be the one who people are being like, people are writing to or, you know, commenting on this editor. How could they? You know what I mean? Like they have no idea like what they did with the piece or anything. It's your name on it. So if it's not something you're proud of, then you're going to have to like sit with that, and that's not fun.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for sharing that. So Megan, we had a comment, I think.
Yeah. So honestly, your vulnerability was so inspiring to me. I was wondering how you cared for yourself and for those around you as you shared your story and your family's story.
I feel like that's a question that I should have thought more about when I was writing it. Well, okay, I will say the last essay, which I specifically wrote that essay last because I knew it's about my father, my relationship with my father. And so it was something where I was like, this is going to be a lot. This is going to be the most emotionally difficult thing for me to talk about. I had some ideas about what I was going to address. And then when it came down to it, there's a point in that essay where I talk about how I was talking to a friend about things he had done. And my friend was just kind of like, why are you still talking to him? And I was like, it was almost like I was just like, someone had like punched me. I was just like, is that just not talk to someone? It's your family? What? And so like it was just really strange to me. But when I was writing that, I ended up, because like when I was talking to her, it was like I could talk about these things as though they were removed from me. And it was very strange, but it's like this thing that I think happens when you talk about your trauma, but you feel kind of like removed from it. And you can kind of like it's almost like a defense mechanism, I feel like. And so when I started writing about that, because I thought it was important for me to note and talk about in the context of the essay is about abuse and everything as well. I didn't know, like I started writing it. And then I started writing like kind of like the list of the things that I said to this person about what he had done. And when I paused, because I edit a lot while I'm writing, I'll like go back and reread the paragraphs over and over and be like, okay, fix this around, da 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 da. And so as I was going back and rereading, I started to cry, like as I was just reading it, and I was just like, fuck, I can't put this in the book. I can't, because if I can't even read it without crying, I'm not going to be able to edit it without crying. I'm not going to be able to have people come up and potentially talk to me about this without crying. I'm not like, and so like, I was just kind of like, I can't, I have to pull that out, that like, and it was then when I kind of realized, and it took a while, like I think I was developing this realization as I was writing it, but it was definitely like kind of cemented by that particular moment. You know, when there's this idea that people, when you write about trauma, that you have to give every single detail, that you have to basically like, you know, show, like, it's almost like you have to have like a spotlight and a camera covering everything. And you have to reproduce it in like visceral detail so that the person is feeling that trauma with you. And I have always been very like, I love horror movies, but I'm not a fan of, you know, of gore porn or whatever, you know, what we want to call it, the stuff where it's just like, you're just watching a person get tortured, torture porn, basically. Like I'm not into that. And I feel like that is like, because I feel like, you know, it brings up things like you don't intend. And if it does that for you, it's going to do that for other people. For me, I had what I kind of realized was like the itself was not what you learn from. You don't learn from trauma. Things that happen to you don't have inherent meaning. They're things that happen to you. It's what you learn and what you do with it after that that imbues it with meaning. And so, it was then that I kind of realized, like, you don't have to show what happens. It's enough to even show what happened, like what you were like before, or what the situation was like before, and what the situation was like after. And that difference is enough for the reader to understand without having to get into the viscera of it and like playing in your emotional intestines and stuff like that. Like, you don't need that. You need to just show that it hurt, show that it, like, how it hurt, and like how it changed the way you viewed things. And so, like, when I did that, it was kind of late in the game because it was the last essay, but I realized then that, like, caring for myself was kind of like doing stuff like that, like saying, I'm not going to share this, because that's kind of the power of writing, and the power of writing your own story in particular is that you can share whatever you choose to share, but you can also choose to hold back whatever you choose to hold back. You don't have to give everything. In fact, it's not healthy, I would say, to give everything. I would say that there are certain things that you should, have a certain emotional distance from, so that you can talk about them in ways that aren't going to hurt you, because you're going to have to talk about them, especially if it's in a book and you go on a book tour and you go and, like, people are going to come up and talk to you. And then all of a sudden you're going to be like, oh my God, now I'm in this traumatic place because this reader who just wanted their book signed brought something up, and you're just like, oh my God, I can't. And now I have to stay here, and now I have to sign all these books, like, and so, in a lot of ways, kind of like writing with the mindset of, I don't want to traumatize other people. I don't want to re-traumatize myself and stuff like that. Like, that was kind of important to me. I'd also, like, I was very careful about what I shared in terms of other members of my family as well. Because, like, some things, like, there are things that I, like, would have been, like, I don't know, that I'm sure that could have gotten more attention if I went into detail about things that happened to this person or that person or whatever. And it might have been more like, I don't know, I like more trauma porny, where people could be like, oh my God, yes. Like, I just want to read about all this terrible things that happened to you and your family so that I feel better about that not happening to me. I just was like, that I'm not comfortable doing that. There's only so many things that I'm willing to share, most of them about myself, not about other people. And even, like, in regards to my parents, I share more about them. I do feel like, they're adults, and they were adults when what happened and when I was a child happened. And, I've talked to both my parents have read my book, and my dad was like, he said to me, after he read it, there's things that you need to, or there's something you don't understand, and I'll talk to you later. And then he never talked to me about it. And then my mother, when she read it, her reaction was basically, I'm not racist. I was like, okay, well, like, that's all you have to say. Okay, I guess. But, like, that's the thing is like, that they were adults, and they were the only adults in those situations. And so, while I did try to protect them and I didn't share all of these awful things that I could have shared, I felt like I shared enough to give the reader an impression of what it was like growing up in that environment, I guess.
I feel like I could talk to you about this for hours. So you just so many things. Because
Yeah.
being part Native myself and a writer, and there's just so many things, so many questions I've had. I guess the one thing I'll say that is, like, kind of a personal story is, the first creative writing class I ever took was at a community college. It was creative nonfiction. So, like, hear you talk about that, I just totally, like, it takes me back. I had an ongoing trauma throughout my life, right? And the moral of the class was exactly what you were saying. Is like, you have to go all in, you leave nothing out. Like, it was like, if you're not doing that, you're kind of what's the word? You're lacking courage, you know?
Mm.
You're kind of a coward as a writer. And this was like an ongoing trauma. Like this was not resolved, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so and that was, it had this feeling of like responsibility to write about it, but just couldn't. I just couldn't. Like, I couldn't even get a single word on the page, you know? And this thing is not really related to like my nativeness. So I actually started to write about that identity and not like traumatic experiences, but experiences that to me were very complex and I wanted to like really unpack and you know, even write poetry about, you know, it was such a great experience for me. And then I wrote 2 pieces. I had this comment from it was like, I think a white guy in the class. And he's like, said something along the lines of like, I wonder if you've ever had experienced trauma before, you know? And it was just like, I was,
oh my God, what a line.
I know, right? Like, I was like,
oh my God.
Trauma, I forget what word he used, but he's like, I'm like, he's like, it was like one sentence, but it was like off the cuff, like, have you ever been through anything terrible in your life? I was just like,
yes, so, right now, actually.
This conversation is awful. I'm gonna write about it.
I know, I'm like bawling. I'm like, yes. So that was a learning experience, you know? Like, so yes. I want to speak to what you were saying because I find that to be extraordinarily true. And I think, and then just to like overall say, I think a lot of this is getting into like the writerness. So I hope there's some writers in here.
Oh yeah.
We definitely have writers in our community. We do writing at prompts every week. If anyone doesn't know that. So yeah, I feel like a lot of the like rules of being a good writer, they're all based on white men that have.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm. Hell yeah. Yeah. I tell the secretary all the time, you know, we go through these classes and we learn all these rules and then we get graded on them, which is a whole other story. But, you know, but you have to learn all these rules. And then you find out that like most of the people who make it don't even follow these rules. So then you're like, why are we learning them in the first place? Like, why are these rules? And then it's kind of like, oh, you have to learn the rules so then you can break the rules. And it's like, but if the goal is to break them, why are they there? You know, we talk about that all the time about how it's just like, you know, there's all those rules in place, but, you know, the reality is like, you just get it out, like get it out and whatever, you know.
Yes.
You know, and I think that's a big part of it. And then kind of going back to like the vulnerability aspect of it, you know, part of taking care of yourself is realizing your boundaries and setting them for yourself. And then realizing that like, it's okay to have those boundaries, you know, kind of like what you were saying, Kateri, about how people are like, no, you have to get it all out there. And I mean, that's just not true. There are certain things that like you were saying, if you're not ready to confront them yourself, how are you supposed to expect other people to read about it, to understand? And it's like you have to protect a part of yourself because so much of you is out there. And I find that one of the things I kind of walk the line of with my own like writing and poetry, or just even what I tell people about my life, as I walk the line of like, what is going to inspire someone else, not what is going to like, make their day worse.
Yes.
Like, I'll share with you what helps, but I'm not going to share with you when I'm like crying in the shower. I'm going to, you know what I mean? I won't share that part, but I'll share what got me out of it, you know, like, but I'm not going to like go through it. And it's kind of that like, what do they call it? Like grief, like vacationing in someone else's grief, or there's like a
voyeurism.
What?
Grief voyeurism or something
like that, but it's like grief tripping or like vacation in someone else's like you know, and I think people to do that, and part of it is because if we read about someone else's traumas, then we don't have to confront our own. Like we can just kind of ignore what's happening in our own lives. So that's kind of the thoughts that I was having.
Trauma porn.
Yeah, trauma porn for sure. Yeah, like you were saying.
Yeah, people just.
It's funny because there's an essay in the book called, it's a bit deeper into the book, it's called On Forbidden Rooms and Intentional Forgetting. And basically my the reason I this book, like that essay is kind of like a little bit of a fuck you, because I remember I was at a music festival when I got this email from another writer, and she was editing an anthology, and she was like, "I'm editing an anthology about rape survivors and what something they've done to help them get through it." And I remember getting like feeling the physical feelings in my body when I got that email, because I was at a fucking music festival and like I was having fun with my two of my brothers, with my husband, and all of a sudden it's like I had never disclosed that I had been raped. And I mean, you can kind of like, based on stats, assume that anyone you're gonna email is gonna have some sort of story, but at the same time I felt very upset at that because I was just like, I've never disclosed to you anything like that, and you're asking me to write about how I've gotten through it. And so the whole, like, I remember being like really pissed off about it, actually, because I was just like, why do you think that just because I'm a writer and just because I'm a woman that I'm actually eager to write about my rape, to write about any like dealing with these specific traumas? Like, I was like, that's pretty bold. So I actually did end up writing a piece for the anthology that was all about basically choosing not to talk about these things, like, and setting those boundaries, and and like also just like intentional forgetting as a psychiatric process. Like, I go into more detail in the actual essay, but like there's a lot of the way that our brains work. It's very, very interesting. I read a lot about it because I'm just fascinated by brains, and like neurology and neurobiology and all of these things. But like our memory is not like, it's a story we tell ourselves. It's not ever, after you've experienced something, you can't ever get back to that place. It's always going to be a story you're telling yourself about what happened. And the more that you remember it, the more that like, the more that you're going to kind of dig deeper, kind of like neural pathways to get to it. And you're going to create these stories, and all of the like, all of the other stuff that you choose not to remember is going to fall away. So all you're going to have left is this thing, this is the memory. And every time you go back to it, you're almost strengthening it and continuing to dig deeper neural pathways so that you can access the memory easier. So, if you're like, when they talked about like looked at depression and stuff like that, they noticed that people did what they call ruminating a lot who were depressed. So they would go back to the worst times in their life, and they would just sit in them and think about them and constantly just live in those spaces in their heads. Even though in the present they were not there, they were in a totally different, like, they were safe presumably, but they were not safe in their heads because they kept going back. And like the whole idea was, during a lot of these studies, was what would it mean if we were to choose to actually forget those things and like not go back and not make those deeper neural pathways? Would that be, like, is it like, do we really have to kind of, like go in deeper into those things to heal from them? Or is it something that we can do, that there are alternatives for? And so, like, even just later in the essay I talk about like the fact of like a court case in general for a rape victim, and how the person who is on trial doesn't have to speak ever. They can choose not to speak, and often they will, like, if they're being charged for something that's very serious, they won't be like, their lawyer will actually advise them against speaking about anything because they could further incriminate themselves. But the victim has to go through everything, has to say everything. And like that imbalance of, okay, well, I have to, as the victim, if I'm going to take this person to court, go over and over and over and over and over and over and dig those pathways and live in that space that I don't want to live in anymore. Whereas the person who presumably raped you gets to sit there and not be any of it. Not like, no one is going to ask him what happened, what did you do, what were you thinking, like all of the details, like what is, like, like what are the sensory things that you remember from that night. They're not really going to ask that. You know what I mean? In the same ways, if you're friends with someone who has been, you know, I don't know if anyone is in like listening or has had friends who have been accused of violent crimes, you know, you're not going to want to ask them those sorts of things. You're not going to be like, oh, I think you did it, bud. What happened? You know what I mean? Like it's just not the way it works. And I think a lot of it has to do with, you know, the way that where our criminal justice system is set up to be punitive and basically, you know, if you admit that you've done this, you're gone. You're taken out of society and stuff like that. And so, you know, it makes it so that why would people admit to those things? You know what I mean? I talk about that later in the last essay when I'm talking about abuse. But, you know, like the way that the criminal justice system is set up, if to admit that you've done something means that you are going to be punished by being taken out of society, by ostensibly being, you know, a lot of prisoners then, you know, engage in what is almost slave labor for corporations and stuff like that. You're going to lose your right to vote. You're going to lose all these other rights. You have to pay for everything while you're in there. You know what I mean? In terms of even talking to your family, the collect calls are absurd. So like, this is what we've set up where like, how can we then get to a place where we can admit to these sorts of things so that we can stop them? You know what I mean? Like where we can actually, you know, come to a place where if there, you know, there's a lot of people who talk about restorative justice and things like that. How can we do that if someone admits that they've done something, then that means that they're gone. You know what I mean? They're out of society. This is such a like a thing where they can't admit anything. And so they're going to deny everything and you're going to be left. The victim is always left holding the bag at the end of the day. So, you know, like it just in terms of, you know, like, and to bring it back to writing, it's almost very much the same, you know, so many women, you know, if you were to talk about women who have written about being the victim of violence, you could find so many different books about that. But whereas if you were to ask for like, what are some books from the perspective of a man who has hit someone in his life? And where is he talking about that, where he's like working on it and engaging with it and saying, where did this come from? Where did these ideas come from? And how can I destroy them so that I'm not going to enter into every relationship further going forward in my life and recreate that abuse cycle? You know, like, where are those books? You know what I mean? Like, we don't have them because there's this level of shame. And, you know, I do think that, you know, we really need to consider what we expect of people. Like, how can we make a better society if we can't create these spaces where people can be vulnerable and still have a life at the end of it? You know what I mean? Like, not to say that, you know, like, I mean, not to say that there shouldn't be any sort of punishment at all, but there, you know, like the way that we're doing it now is clearly not working because like the, you know, while like violent crime has gone down, it's not like it's all disappeared. In fact, it seems like every, you know, the Me Too movement proved that that, you know, just talking about these things isn't enough to really make that much change. And we're also all going through varying levels of this in our everyday lives. And so it's just really, it's really difficult, I guess. But, you know, for us to move forward, we really need to think about, you know, the role of shame in our society, the role of punitive justice, the role of like, you know, like this idea that, oh, we're going to live in someone else's trauma. You know, what do you get from that? You know what I mean? What is it that you, like, if you were to sit and think about it, and I think about it all this stuff all the time. So, you know, I guess I wrote a book of essays about it, but you know, like when I think about like, I want to watch horror movies, like what is it about horror movies that I just keep coming back to? And I think a lot of the time is, you know, for me anyways, is, you know, this is something that by the end of the movie, the horror is done. The, like, you know, that you see a complete ending to whatever is happening. You know, maybe there's not, like, maybe they, you know, they make the last grab or whatever from, like, if we're talking about Carrie at the end of the movie where she grabs or whatever, or, you know, there's going to be sequels. But like at the end of the day, you know, all of these movies are set up so that the horror is clearly defined as horror. It's not something that, you know, is it's like, oh, well, what is the ghost really trying to do, though? Maybe we should listen to the ghost perspective. We got to get both perspectives here. Like, it's not really that kind of situation. So, like, and that in some ways is very, very calming for people, I think. And then having like that where at the end it's vanquished, or or maybe we just leave it alone sometimes too. In Japanese horror, they have much different ideas about death and everything, which I think is fascinating. But so that you can see how that's different in their horror than in American horror. But yeah.
Definitely. Anyway. I took a Native American horror class in my English. It was definitely like one of the coolest.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that was really cool. We read, I have the books right here actually. Bone Game by Lewis.
Oh, I'm gonna write that down. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, actually, I happen. It's crazy. I have them. I don't always have them. This is a murder mystery. It takes place. It's a campus novel. Like the author, I think, is a professor on UC Santa Cruz campus, and that's
oh my gosh.
So it's like a campus novel murder mystery. Really good. Really good. And then this is like even better. My favorite. If you're.
Oh yes.
Cellar Storms, which this was like more. This is not horror, but there's elements at the end of. It gets into like kind of like not climate change, but like essentially climate change. Where it's like there's 3 generations of Native women, kind of more up, I think, on the Great Lakes, and they have to go like to their like ancestral lands that they've been displaced from, and because there's like corporations coming in and taking over the land, and so it's like towards the end where you start to get some of those. There's like violence and stuff like that. So, anyway, yeah. So I just a lot of things that you were saying made me think of those books, and yeah, definitely interesting stuff, and I appreciate that. I have my cousins here from New Mexico.
Hi, Kaz.
Hi, Kaz. Where I wanted to like talk to you also about being like mixed race, and my cousin and I are also like part Native American. Another thing kind of in conjunction with that, which something you said earlier made me think of it. Early in the book, you talk about someone says to you, "Oh, you're a Native writer. You're gonna have an easy job getting a publishing deal." Which yeah. So anyway, just thoughts in general, because I just you talk about it in the book, but while I have you here, I just curious to hear what that experience has been like, and also maybe throwing in the reception of the book too, like by your community. So anything that you have to share.
Well, I'm really happy because my I'll just say real quick, because there's not too much to say about it. I'm really, really happy. There's been a lot of people from my community, specifically Six Nations, read the book and it really resonated with them. They were, they weren't mad at me. So that's good. I think some of them were probably surprised because my I'm sorry, I'm just laughing at that comment. but I'm sure that there are people in my community who, because I think especially traumatized families and communities kind of like have this weird thing where we've been through this but we can't talk about it. And so there's and I would say like the more traumatized, the less you actually talk about it, which is re-traumatizing in its own way. You can't like get validation for what your feelings are or anything like that. And so there were some things that I think my dad kept really well hidden from members of our community in terms of what was actually happening in my house, that that other people, when they read it, were just kind of like, oh, even then they didn't really like, it was just kind of like, what'd your dad say? It was like, he didn't talk to me about it. He said he was going to, but then he never did. So Typical Wes. But so it was pretty good. I get especially like happy when Indigenous women read the book. I think that when any of them have can read one of the essays and say like I had something similar happen to me. I'm like just having that someone say something out loud. It's there's this like I do this thing where when I'm reading something, it's all like all the facts and figures are floating around in my head, and so I'm kind of listening to this this audiobook, I guess, by Brene Brown. She does a lot of work on trauma and shame, and it's called The Power of Vulnerability. And one of the things that one of the stats that she cites is that when we have these, like she calls them shame gremlins, because when they come to light, they're kind of destroyed. So like when you have things that you have shame over, when you talk about them, even just saying them out loud, kind of cuts their power over you by up to 80%, just saying it. And so, I feel like, being able to say some of these things that maybe other Indigenous women have gone through, but maybe haven't had the time, haven't had the space to say, or haven't when you don't see your experience reflected, it makes it always feel like it's all just you. Like, oh, maybe it's just me. Maybe like no one else has dealt with this, and like it's just me, and I'm the crazy one, or I'm awful, or all of those things that you tell yourself in the dark of the night before you fall asleep, and the things that that really hurt you over time, and really mess with your self-esteem. Seeing that other people have gone through it and come out the other side, and remembering that you have come out the other side, I think that is really powerful. And so I'm happy about that. It's funny in regards to the mixed race thing. I feel kind of like an asshole for saying this, but I don't really care that much about being mixed race, and I feel like that is something that when you have grown up and in particular households, and in particular communities where people are saying you're not this enough, you're not that enough, that I felt that. And so I don't want to say that it's not powerful. It is powerful. It's something that totally makes you think that race is real when it's not real. That's the thing. There's all of this race theory and all of this stuff, but at the end of the day, they can't actually find, there's not race genes. Even when we send in our DNA to what is it, 23andMe or whatever, I don't know, all of those gene places that they're like, you're 25% Polish, you're 26% this or that, you know what I mean? That's actually all a bunch of bullshit. There's this Indigenous scholar named Kim Tallbear who talks about this all the time. There's actually no genealogical proof of race. It is really a construct. Sometimes they'll say you have similar kind of things that happen in these areas, but that doesn't mean that's not a race. You can't, there's no black gene, there's no white gene, you know what I mean? It's literally your skin color is just your skin color. Race is something that literally was that you can point to when it was created, and it was created right around when basically everyone started all of the European nations started investigating areas of the world, because they saw people who were black, they saw people who were brown, and they used that. At first it was they used papal bulls, which were the Roman Catholic Church passed these what are basically kind of laws that made it so that they could legally enslave people, so that they could legally kill people who were considered pagans or whatever, even during the Spanish Inquisition and all of that stuff. It's actually very rooted in religion. And that's where race came from. It came from that. It's not a real thing. And so when people are saying oh, you're not Native enough, oh, you're not white enough or whatever, no one really says you're not white enough. But when people talk about those things, it's once you come to a certain understanding that race is not real, that and also that, you know, when you talk about in particular, I think that this is more something that maybe Indigenous people can understand, because our nations are kind of like, we have there's like over 600 Indigenous nations in North America alone. And those are and that's only just the ones that have survived. That's not talking about the ones that have died out as a result of disease, as a result of genocide, as a result of mass murders, all of these things that happened, you know. So like you have all of these different nations, all of them have different creation stories, different languages, different art, different food, different you know, philosophies, different governance structures, different, all of these things are different across all of them. There's 600 in the in North America alone, and we're all just called Native American, or we're all just called Indigenous, or according to CNN on election night, we're all called something else. You know what I mean? Like this, like this. When you think about it in that way, you're like, I'm not Native American. I'm Haudenosaunee. I don't, like, you know, when someone, if someone were to talk about their experience as a Dene person up north, or in Nova Scotia right now, the Mi'kmaq people are having a really hard time because white people are pissed off. White fishers are pissed off that they have treaty rights and that they can, and because of that, they get 500 lobster over the course of their entire season, whereas all of the white fisheries are collecting 500 per day per ship. You know what I mean? And they like actually came and like lit it on fire and stuff like that. Like they have a treaty with Canada that's a peace and friendship treaty where that allows them to have that. That's written in there, and that's part of how like Canada can say that it's real, because it has these treaties. The treaties are the basis of the country. And so you know, like when some people talk about that, I can mention it, but I'm not Mi'kmaq, so I don't know what their specific history is of that land. If someone's Dene, I don't know what their creation myths are. You know what I mean? Like, and so when you think about it like that, you're just like, yeah, like race is not a thing. It's really more about like culture. It's really more about all of these things. And then, you know, it comes back to what is American culture. And, you know, you can say that it's like apple pie. You can say that it's like, you know, like whatever, but realistically, American culture is consumerism and extraction. And, you know, like that's what it all comes down to is, you know, consumerism, going global with all of these American things that can now be purchased anywhere in the world. And the money is going to get funneled back into people who are living in the US, or, you know, extraction, where they're going into, and Canada is very, very involved in extraction as well, all around the world. Barrick Gold goes into different nations. They poison the waters. That literally leads to like the deaths of Indigenous people who are living in South America. And you know, they're like, here, we have this gold. You know what I mean? Like this is the reality of the world that we're living in, where we don't have a culture for these countries anymore. So like what we have is these nationalist ideas of, you know, well, I'm a citizen of the US and therefore I'm American and therefore I'm proud to be American. What does that mean to you? What does that mean when you say I'm proud to be American? What exactly are you proud of? Are you proud of the history of your country? Because if you are, I would ask why. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what is it in particular that you're proud of? Do you actually know the full history of your country and how it came to be? Are you going all the way back to, like I said, the papal bulls that literally said, you know, anyone who is not white and a Christian can be killed, and it doesn't count as a sin. This was the fucking Roman Catholic Church that was saying, you know, like the 10 Commandments, do not kill, doesn't count if this person is not white, doesn't count if this person is not Christian. This was how the country was created. When you talk about like the Trail of Tears, for example, that was literally Cherokee people who were supposed to be on the eastern side of the country were forced to walk across the entire country to where they are today. And, you know, like they were forced to do that. And how many people died as a result of that, so that they could make room for settlers to come in. Like, this is the reality. If we're going to say you're proud to be American, you need to be very clear about what it is that you're proud of. There are certain things, like I'm not trying to say like you need to just feel guilt, but you need to be aware of these things. You know what I mean? Like, guilt is only productive if you're actually using it to change things. If you're just using it to sit in it, then that's not going to do anything. But like realistically, you need to look at the full picture. Yes, yes, America totally changed the way that you know, like they came up with this idea that, you know, there's the American dream. Anybody can go from like being like whatever to like, you know, a poor person to a CEO in the US. And like the reason behind that was because there wasn't the same kind of monarchy, there wasn't the same kind of feudalism, there wasn't all of that, but there was still class. It just wasn't the same. And so, you know, like we talk about, you know, the immigration of, you know, Chinese people who came in to build the railroads and then were treated like shit. And that's the same in Canada. We had a Chinese head tax in Canada, where once they got enough Chinese people in to come and like build the railroads, where so many of them died, they wanted to bring over their families. And so Canada was like, we don't want Chinese people living here. Actually, we are a white country that has stolen from indigenous people, and we are not, and we are going to make it so that it's harder for Chinese people to come. So we instituted the Chinese head tax. In the same way, like Canada has always been much more like sly and about these things than the US. So, you know, like they're like, oh, Canada was the place where all the slaves went, so it was like so much greater for Black people. And then you talk about like how Africaville was a community of Black people that was doing well, and literally white people just came and burned it all down because they were mad that Black people were doing well. You know, and then you talk about also the way that Canada specifically made it so that Black people, if you were coming from a Black country, you could not come into Canada for a good 50 years until they realized that they needed more people. And so they repealed those laws and then like said that they were multicultural. And that's where the multicultural values came in the US or in Canada in the 80s. So like, if you look at all of these histories, it's all about like exclusion and them trying to create what they think of as their country. What is it that the people at the top think of as the country? And are they, for example, even now, like with I can't say that word, I think on YouTube, but the pandemic that's happening right now, it primarily has is impacting people who have disabilities, who already have medical conditions and stuff like that. And those people have been forgotten by so many of the American, politicians. They're still not Medicaid for all, which like I believe America might be the only country that is still holding out on that in the world, which is wild. Like they're like, oh, it's going to be so terrible. Then why is it okay for the rest of the world? Like, I don't know. But anyways, like, you have those things where these people are like, this is our people. And when you have nationalism and these people are outside of it, but those people still live in the nation and you're still collecting taxes from those people and they're still paying for things and consuming things to keep the economy going. So like, what's going on here? You know what I mean? So when we're talking about race, then it kind of like becomes like, it only is important when people kind of bring it into importance. So like when people are like, well, we're a white Judeo-Christian country, and like that's obviously a lie. But like when you're saying that this thing that's not real, you're making it real by saying that only these people count. Then that's where it becomes important. But when it comes down to like actual like individual identity, I feel like it's not a very like. It's, to me, being mixed race, I'm just kind of like, it is what it is, right? You know what I mean? Like I'm two races. I'm seen as, I'm seen as Native because I have a Native dad and I'm clearly white passing. So I just say that I look white, I'm white. I find that things like white passing is a little bit like trying to dodge the subject. Like the reality is if I'm walking down the street, I'm not going to get harassed in the way that my cousins who are dark skinned are. So like, to me, I feel like that might be like if certain people are like in their feelings about being mixed race. One of my friends is like theorist, and she came up with this term called mixed race fragility, and I think it's very astute because there's a specific type of fragility that's akin to white fragility, but it's more like if you're mixed race and you're like, I don't know what I am I this, am I this, and it's just kind of like that doesn't matter, like. Yeah. Like you're you. So like you're both like you it's not like you have to be one or the other unless someone is asking you to be one or the other, in which case you don't need to agree to those terms, you know what I mean? And so for me, find that mixed, like talking about being mixed race, I worked it out in my essay and my book, because I was just like, being white isn't even a thing. There's culture that has to like come into it. There's all of these other things. And so like you have to think about it as a whole and not think of it as just like, oh, well, I guess I'm white, so you know what I mean? But I don't know. I feel like I'm like rambling at this point.
No, I think that feels like kind of my journey with it, which has been more kind of recent. I guess I'll throw my cuz up there too, because she's still in the chat. You can't say native to white people, they don't believe you. You had to explain yourself, but like you said, we get the privileges of white people.
I just feel like at that point, it's just kind of like one of the things where someone's like, oh, you're not native. Like, no one says that to me at this point. But if they would, I would be like, well, you know, my intergenerational trauma says differently. I'm sorry. That's my...
I want to remember that one.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm just like, well, you know, intergenerational trauma says different. I don't know.
Read my book. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think Megan, probably you too.
Yeah, I was kind of one of the things that you were saying earlier on was kind of like what are you proud of? And one of the things I've been saying a lot recently about America in particular, because I live here, is that you cannot like overcome the past until you've like acknowledged that it's happened.
Yeah.
And that's been a huge thing, I think, that I've been trying to go on the journey of lately, is just like, I can't like help change the world if I don't know what's happened in it. You know, and that's why I was glad when Kateri found this book, because I'm learning a lot from your book about stuff I never knew about. And that I was telling Kateri, is like, I'm embarrassed to say I never looked into or even thought about it. You know, but for me, it's like, I can't like change anything until I know like what's happened before. And I think that that's something that any country really, but I think
absolutely
really needs to look into, is that like, well, you can't move forward until you've really like confronted what's happened in the past, and you've really confronted, you know, America, for example, like what it's built on the backs of, you know, the people it is built on the backs of. And until you acknowledge that, then you can't really change anything if you're just kind of forgetting or not forgetting, just willful ignorance, really, of what has happened. And I think that that's like one of the biggest issues. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed from reading your book is the history that you put into it. And I would say, especially on the Canadian side, like I really appreciate that, because I had no idea. You know, I think living in America, I feel like we get just so wrapped up in America. Like, I need to only learn about my country. And it's like, no, there's a whole other world out there. Like, there are other things to learn about. You know, and I remember I was a history minor, and I remember being in history class and thinking, oh yeah, we learn about other countries, so we know what not to do, you know, or something like that. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I kind of forgot it, of like, oh yeah, we learn about other countries. And then now I'm so focused, which is like selfish, but it really is. And it's something I've been confronting myself. But I really love the history that you've been putting into it, because I didn't know that history and I never cared about it before, which is like not great. So I've really been enjoying reading about it and looking into it even more. And Kateri too, like she has like a side project that she's been working on for the book club.
Yeah, I was also reading The Heartbeat I have it in my bedroom, it's by my bed. The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee by David Walker, which just recently came out. And that's a big, thick book. And I had to put that down to work on this, but I'm going to, you know, continue reading that. So yeah, I mean, for me, like, you know, it's like, you kind of you still have to do your own research. And I'm, you know, I come from, you know, a Native family, but like, I'm trying to learn a lot more myself. So, you know.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I feel like, you know, in so many ways our education, we can't really rely on on school in so many ways because there's someone who decided that what we have to learn and that's this and this and this, and those are often, I find, not like, I don't know, like this is where you start going into the history. The history of schooling is just that it was supposed to exist so that people could put their kids somewhere while they went to school for a work day, and like the reason why the hours are the way that they are, and all of that is very heavily tied up in the creation of the industrialization, and having people having to go to having women having to go to jobs as well as men who are on the very lower class. They've all had to go to work, and so where are you going to do with your kids? And that's kind of where school started. So when you think about the fact that school wasn't even started to actually teach children, it was actually created just so that basically as like a daycare, so that the parents could go and sacrifice their body, sacrifice their time for the benefit of people who eventually that money is not going to them. It's going all the way up to the top. So when you start thinking about that and the fact that we have not actually changed the way that education works or anything since that time, it's actually ridiculous, especially when you think about there's all of these studies that have been done about the way that education, we can change education. There's so many different theories around education that actually haven't been put into place in places like the US, but are in other places. And, when it comes down to when you're an adult and you're like, oh my God, I went through school for this long and what did I come out of it with? It's even in terms of your own history, I talk about, all the stuff that I talk about in the book. I had to learn that myself, even in terms of stuff about my own community, stuff about treaties through my nations. I had to learn that all myself. I wasn't getting taught that. And so, when you start thinking about all of these things and kind of going from, what is it like? I guess I took this course, and I find it this terminology very useful from the course. They talked about what were the social interests of this of what happened. So in terms of who is this benefiting? You know what I mean? Who is this kind of education benefiting? Is it benefiting? You have to ask, and it's an open question. Who is this benefiting? And often a lot of the things that that at this point, in so many places in the world are benefiting is for us to keep our nose down, think that there's no other options other than the world that we're living in now, which actually is very interesting at this moment in time because of the pandemic that's happening. It's really showing how actually precarious our entire world economy is, how precarious all of us are in some ways, because for capitalism and consumerism to keep going, for us to kind of be in the hamsters in that wheel, we have to be able to be outside. We have to be able to be in close quarters. If you're working in a factory, for example, it's almost impossible to work on a line without being in close quarters. And so you're having people who are having to try and work in these places, and they're becoming super spreader events where there's people who are all working in these very close quarters. And it's the same in prisons. It's the same, what I mean? All of these things where we're trying to force this way that we've been living to keep going. Even it can't right now. It can't. And because it can't, it's kind of causing all of the cracks that were always there to become even more apparent. And we're all just sitting in our houses and we're not really able to go out anywhere and then now we're holy shit, look at all these cracks around here. Oh my God, this world that we're living in is not sustainable. It never has been, but we've just been so busy that trying to because capitalism makes it so that we have to keep going and going and going and going, and you can't stop, and you can't have no time is your own. You have to always be guilting yourself for you have to answer emails at home. You have to answer email. There's no time off. It's basically made it so that there's no time for yourself. You always have to have a side hustle. You always have to do what I mean? All of these things, or you're not going to have money to pay rent. Why do you need money to pay rent? You know what I mean? Why do we need this? Why is it that, homelessness actually didn't always exist. Like if we go back far enough, when certain economists, certain people, politicians, certain philosophers say that we were in the Stone Age, or we were in whatever age, Bronze Age, whatever, there was no homelessness back then. We had people, you were born into a place, you have a home. And now we've progressed through capitalism, through the Industrial Revolution and all of these things, through global capitalism and all of this, to a point now where there is homelessness, there is drug addiction, there is obesity, there is abuse, because that's the other thing too that we don't like to talk about, is that, when you lived in places where, like, once we were able to live in homes, you could keep things secret. So, abuse has gotten worse. Like all of the stats that I've seen as a result of the lockdowns that have been happening due to the pandemic, like domestic violence has gone through the roof. No one can see it. It's in these little houses, you know what I mean? And we don't have these communities that care for one another anymore. We don't have, you know what I mean? So like, while we're going and going and going and getting all of this stuff that's like getting dangled in front of our faces, we're forgetting that like we don't actually have anything substantial. Like if you stop working, you will get kicked out of your home. If you stop working, you will have no money to pay for any, like, your food for your family. You will have, like, you know what I mean, no clothes, like all of the stuff. All of it is so precarious. And, I think that it's important for us to kind of reflect on that. Like, is this the world that we want? Like, is this the world that where we, where any of us, if something happens, like, bam, we're out. Is that what we want? Is that what we want for our neighbors? Is that what we want for our friends, for our family? And so like, these are the kinds of things where I think right now is a very important moment in, I would say, world history, because it's happening. Like, there's never been a pandemic like this ever. And with this kind of magnitude. And so like, what do we want to create now? What is it that is most important for us? And like, in the US, you just went through a major election. And so, it's kind of like what, I'm curious to see what these leaders think is important and what they want to create for us, what they want to do to make it so that all of us feel safe. What would it be like if all of us felt safe? I don't know, because that hasn't happened in my lifetime. But, maybe it could happen if we have enough like safety nets for people, where we stop saying you need to somehow earn the ability to live. You need to earn a home. You need to earn food, that you need to live. You need to earn clean water, because that's also something that, especially on like reserves in Canada, like my reserve, we don't have potable clean water for every house. So you know what I mean? Like, so that's like that basic thing of being able to turn on the water and drink what's coming out. That's something that not everyone has, which means that someone somewhere thinks that the people off the reserve deserve to have this, because they don't even need to think about it. Whereas the people on the reserve, we have to keep lobbying governments, and they're like, it's too much money. But that doesn't happen for off the reserve. And so they're literally creating these pockets where it's like, these people deserve this, and the other people don't deserve anything. Like, how long can we do that? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. We all have to rely on each other ultimately for the world to continue.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely. Can you hear me now? Okay, I think it's definitely something that our community is. I'm still going, aren't I? Is about. Okay. Can you hear my echo? Okay. Technology. I think it's definitely something that our community is thinking about, as far as like our book club, the Yang Gang, being the Yang Gang book club. I feel like, UBI is like the universal basic income. It's like the policy that Andrew Yang ran on, and it's kind of what we ran around. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that ended up, for me personally, and I think Megan can agree, like that ended up being like the tip of the iceberg for like our own radicalization of like doing this book club. We're like seeing how I've like had the thought of where it's just sort of like I kind of feel like I went from being like, yeah, we need money so that the government give us money, we can have our basic needs met. And then it went from like there, like that's so great, to be like, why do we even need money in the first place? Like,
well, that's the thing, right? Why? Why? It came from somewhere. It started but before that, there was a time where that didn't exist. Like there was a time. And so when we have all of these people telling us like, oh, it's impossible, it's like, well, it didn't always exist. So actually, it's not impossible. In fact, there's actually models that exist that we can look to. And it is like it's not to say that the world is totally different. Like the fact that we can now like even right now just be all talking on like computers and stuff like that, and be shot out into the internet world. But that's wild. That's not something that anyone has had before. But when you think about it, what is it that we as human beings, as people who have to share this planet, how is that helping us? How is it how is that making our lives better? Is it making our lives better? Or, there's a lot of evidence that it's actually making our mental health worse, because we're not actually supposed to be wired to know everything that's going on everywhere all at once, all the time. We're not actually supposed to be able to text everyone all the time and like contact anyone at any given moment. Like that's not good for us. I don't know. It's just funny when you think about it, like how can we take these tools that we've created now and then, make the world we want to make, is what I'm more concerned about. Like, what do we want to do? What is it that we want to create? What is the world we want to leave for our kids or for the future generations? What is it that we would be proud to leave for them? Instead of being like, I am so sorry, we really fucked up. We really this up and I'm so sorry. Good luck.
Yeah. Yeah. That really. Oh no, I was gonna say, like, that really makes me think of one of the books we read earlier was The Future Earth by Eric Holthaus. And he really dives into that, like how we just need a complete reconstruction of society, like on a global scale, really, just this complete like reconstruction of like what society looks like and how we used to have this inherent trust in each other, and now we don't trust each other.
Yeah.
And if you don't trust your neighbor, how can you care for your neighbor? Like you don't care what happens to them because you believe that they don't care what happens to you. And he just has this whole it's a really beautiful picture that he paints of like a society that's not built on capitalism, and a society that's not built on I lost my train of thought. We've gotten over an hour and a half. My brain is like,
that's fair.
It's like clockwork. It's like clockwork. My ADHD will just like add an hour and a half. And it's just like, woo.
This is like a running joke.
It is. It literally is. I'm surprised actually that I managed to get out so many sentences. But yeah, it's this really beautiful picture of a society that's built on trust, and a society that's he actually goes into a lot about getting back in touch with the earth, and treating the earth as a living thing and not just something to dominate. He goes into that a lot, and that a lot of what you've been saying, I was like, oh man, how can I get you two in touch? Like, you can talk. It's this really, I think it's a beautiful picture, and I think it's one of those things that we're so scared to think of, because it's almost like, are we allowed to hope anymore that there is a better future? But I think one of the things we've learned through this book club, and one of the things we've learned talking to authors like you and other people that we've spoken to, is that you guys kind of write hope into your books. There is this hope that is still kind of underlying of like, we know what's going wrong, but we really want something better. And the fact that you do still want something better, to me, is a form of hope. The fact that we still strive for a better future. And I take notes on my phone from the book. And one of the ones that I highlighted actually was the 7 generations thing. I have that like in my notes and highlighted and like underlined. And I was like, this is like really should be what society strives to be, is what am I leaving? Are we even going to have a seventh generation at this point in time? Is there going to be a 7 generations from now? And I think it's just, I love everything you're saying. It's all coming full circle for me.
We wanted to, but like, since we probably should wrap it up here pretty soon, but we really wanted to talk to you about, with just in regards to our recent election. We shared this recently. It came to light that in Arizona, which was a big deciding factor in this election, that Indigenous people had a very prominent role. I always struggle saying this. The federally recognized tribes, which I always like to highlight because there's the map that shows the federally recognized tribes, so that's a whole other rabbit hole we can get into, matched up beautifully with the counties that went blue in that state. And so I just want to, not to get like too political, we don't like to do that here, but I think it's just kind of important to talk about like the way Native people, especially what we read with the Future Earth in regards to climate change, but that also has to do with every aspect of our daily lives, like what we want to like make that world, that next world, look like.
It's interesting bringing up voting, and it's funny because like Haudenosaunee people have a very, very I will say contentious relationship with voting, only because so I'm kind of like gonna go on like a little bit of a tangent just because so our history is such that the and I talk about this in the book. There is one of the first treaties that the Haudenosaunee made with Europeans was with the Dutch people, and it was called the Two-Row Wampum. And basically what it is like, if you were to look at it, because all wampum belts were basically just like visual representations of an agreement that was made. And, it was actually very important that people would remember each thing, that like each string, what it all represented. And that was to be carried on, because that was treaties were living documents. They were things that they were not just things you signed. They were agreements you made in terms of how you were going to live. And the Two-Row Wampum is actually very, very interesting, I think, like in terms of philosophy also, but also just politically, because what it was it's this row, like this, this belt of white wampum beads, and then there are 2 rows of purple that go through the middle, and they go parallel. So they're just like, basically it just looks like a white belt with like 2 lines that go in the middle that are purple. And what they basically, and they have like 3 rows of white in between them, which also represent things. So the two purple lines represent 2 ships that are going parallel along what the white is, the river of life. And so the purple, like, so, and one vessel is kind of like the Europeans' vessel, which which holds all of their customs, all of their culture, all of their, their laws, and all of their like, art, everything that is important to them is in their boat that they're going to, travel along the river of life with. And on the other one is, what would be, the Haudenosaunee people's canoe. And that would include all of our things. And we were going to go like alongside together. And the 3 beads in between, I'm going to mess this up because it's been a while, but they basically represent peace, friendship, and respect, I believe. And so that's what they were representing, as the things connecting them is this, there's friendship, there's peace, there's respect. But what's important is that they're going parallel and they're not intersecting. So basically what it kind of was saying was, we're going to be friends. And, you're going to go down your river of life, and you have all of your own things that you want to do. You have all of your, your laws, you have all of your customs, you have all of your culture, all of your art, you're doing all of your stuff. Awesome. We're doing our thing over here, and we're going to, go parallel. We're sharing this land, so we're going to, be around, but you're not going to interfere with our path, and we're not going to interfere with your path. We're not going to, interfere with your laws. You're not going to interfere with our laws. We're going to go parallel. And this is, with friendship between us. And if it goes on further where there's then something called the Silver Covenant chain, which would be like something that, you are then supposed to polish. This treaty was originally with the Dutch, but then it was one that was we were like, this is a really good treaty, so let's like use it with other people. So it was also then given to the British. The British accepted it, and then it was also gone down to Canada, because Canada was at the time like, Canada didn't go the same route as the U.S. where the U.S. was like, goodbye, we're independent. Canada was just kind of like eventually given its independence by Britain, when they were just like, okay, stop asking us everything. What you need to do, just do it. So basically, so these two people are, these two vessels are going side by side, and like the chain was supposed to be something that was between them, and if there was a problem, they would tug on the chain, and there's always somebody holding on to it, so they feel the tug, and then you come in and you ask, and then you talk about things. And so that was supposed to be the way that the relationship was supposed to work. And so for my people, we're very, very serious about our treaties. And so actually, Six Nations people generally don't vote because we see that as a violation of our treaty responsibilities. Because we were not ever conquered by Canada, but Canada just decided that we were part of them and like absorbed us. And we actually my people have a very, very long, awesome, interesting history, which I won't go into detail about, but we did go to the UN at one point and lobby for us to be allowed into what was like the predecessor to the UN, the League of Nations. And then got in trouble, and the person who went to go do that wasn't allowed back into Canada and had to die in the US. They wouldn't even allow their like relatives to come from Six Nations, like their family, to come and see him dying. So like it's very contentious. My people are very much like treaty people. We didn't give up anything. And so, it's very, very contentious in my community talking about voting, because a lot of us see that as violation of treaty. It doesn't really, there's always the argument to be made that Canada violated that treaty, and so the treaty is null and void. And there are people who, so it is a very big topic. Six Nations is the most populous reserve in Canada, and it has the lowest voter turnout in the country, at only, I think, 20% or something like that. No, it's less. I think it's 12%. So very, very low. Even though there are 25,000 members of my res, often the elected band council, which was forced in by the RCMP, so literally forced in by guns, and everything. Our traditional council was kicked out of our traditional house. They they stole all of our wampum belts and all of that stuff in 1924. And the votes you're lucky if there's 1,000 votes total for all of it. So it's a very contentious issue. And then even in Canada in particular, there's there's always these questions about, what is the point of voting for people who are never going to acknowledge that they stole land, that are never going to try to give care for you. In Canada in particular, that we don't have running water on most of our on a lot of our reserves. And Prime Minister Trudeau said that he was going to have it by a certain amount of time. He is not on track to keep that at all. And all of that even also didn't take into account, they were there's all these they would have boil water advisories. So they said they were going to get rid of all the boil water advisories, but that didn't take into account reserves like my reserve, which it wasn't on a boil water advisory, but we don't have, they spent so much money to create this water treatment plant, but then they wouldn't pay for the infrastructure to make sure that it accessed all the homes on the reserve. So we have this big water treatment plant that only gives potable water to maybe 10% of the res. So you know what I mean? All of this stuff is constant, and then you're what are we And the Liberals were Trudeau was the one who ran on reconciliation. He ran on, I'm the Indigenous people's superhero. I'm going to get it all done. and he didn't get it all done. And so, there's all these always questions of, are you going to vote for people who, who are not going to see you? Who, like I said, and like CNN had something else as like the, it didn't even say Native Americans, it just said something else. And so we were, I guess, about something else, something in there. And I think that actually is a very good metaphor for the ways that the U.S. has actually traditionally treated Indigenous people. Actually, in the essay 34 grams per dose, I think I talk about this a little bit, but it's very hard to find stats in the U.S. on anything to do with Indigenous people. They don't take stats. And so like in Canada, they do. There's a little bit more there. I think because we had to fight, we fought like tooth and nail to make it so that we had that kind of stuff. But, there's not a lot of stats taking for that. But, like on the other hand, there is the argument that, it's almost like a harm reduction vote. And so like that is what some people will call it. So, like you're voting, but, you're voting basically not knowing that no one is going to actually care that much about your community. No one is going to actually care that much about your concerns. But this guy is better than, like, this guy's going to do worse things in my community than this guy's going to do. So I'm going to vote for the guy who's going to do less worse things.
Yeah.
That's going to be my harm reduction vote. And so, like in Canada, it's a very complex, complicated conversation, not just in Canada too, because the Haudenosaunee people also live in the US as well, in New York and Wisconsin, Ohio, some places. But, like, I think that it is, I think it's just very telling that, people don't take into account Indigenous people's perspectives on anything. Really, they don't really court our vote because, especially in the US, that they're like, oh, it's such a small percentage, so who cares? But it's funny because this actually, I'm pretty sure statistically, there's the same amount of percentage of Indigenous or Native American people as there are Jewish people. And so people would never say like, we don't care about Jewish people, like it's like that doesn't make sense. But for some reason, it makes sense when you're talking about Indigenous people. Like it makes sense when, all of the country is on stolen land. And, there aren't treaties for large tracts of it. And you talk about like things like Standing Rock, where, that happened and they were fighting for water. And of course, after they got all that, like they came in and like basically threw everyone in jail. They all were like, okay, we're done. And they did have like leaks of oil in the water not that long afterwards, and they still continue to have them. And, what are we going to do with like, how are we going to drink oil, Yeah. But anyways, I do think that it is indicative of people not caring and wanting to erase us, like just say that we don't exist. We're something else. We don't even get it. We don't get terminology. We don't get counted in censuses. We don't get like our perspective on anything. Any kind of data taking that is done doesn't include us. You know what I mean? Like when all of this happens, it's like we're being made into ghosts, the ghosts of America, but we're all still alive. And so, it's kind of strange. Like you see all these jokes about how all of America is built on an Indian burial ground, but that's funny, but I mean, I guess, but, that's not your ancestors that are dead. And that's not and you're not the survivors of that. And say, like it makes it so that it's like, you don't exist, but it's like, I'm right here. How do I not exist? So, when you're trying to erase these groups of people, it's the question I always have is why? What is it that you have to gain from erasing these people? And the reality is they have to gain, like, they don't have to feel bad. All of us are dead now. When we're extinct and when we don't exist, they don't have to feel bad that we, that they fucked us over. We don't have to feel bad that we continue to be, have some of the highest suicide rates in the world. It doesn't matter that, and like all of those kinds of questions, we have a lot of sociologists that are asking like, well, why is it that, Indigenous people have the highest suicide rates in the world and all of this? And they don't think about culture as something that's important. They don't think of how people derive self-worth from whether they are seen and treated as beings worthy of respect and care and love and consideration. And when we don't see that, when that's not reflected back to us, how are we supposed to feel like we belong on this earth? How are we supposed to feel like we belong in these countries and these political parties and any of these things? We don't feel like we belong. And so when you don't, when you say it doesn't matter that you don't have, that you're losing your language, that there's only like 3 speakers left of it in the world, it doesn't matter, like all of these things. And it's like, why do you say it doesn't matter? If you weren't allowed to speak English, if every single time you said it, you were hit when you were in school and you were kept away from your family for until you were 18, and then you were supposed to just be like, okay, go now, like how are you supposed to then be a successful parent yourself for your children? How are you supposed to feel any pride in who you are? How are you supposed to, like all of these things are all connected, and so I think that when we don't explore why it is that Indigenous people are treated as the ghosts of America, it just feel like it's something that we really need to all look at. It's different in the US than it is in Canada. We're much more visible in Canada, but it's almost inverse to the Black community, whereas the Black community has a much higher, much stronger voices, and the US are treated much more with, like, I would say with, at least as being acknowledged, whereas in Canada, Black people are almost treated as like they don't exist. It's almost like inverse with Indigenous people in that way. So, people can say, I've never read a Black Canadian author. And you're like, if you were to say, I've never heard of a Black American author, people would be like, do you read? Like Toni Morrison, hello? All of these things, but it's like inverse in Canada. And so, like these things are being done for specific reasons. And we need to like shed light on those reasons so that we can then think, like, why are we doing this? Is this going to be something that is going to, at the end of the day, like, because I keep getting to, I know this is like, I keep going on tangents, so sorry. But like, at the end of the day, I do keep coming back to, we are on a planet that is going to go on with or without us. And we are, like, humans, all of the predecessors to us in terms of, like, not like Homo sapiens, and then all of the, like, actually haven't lived that long, and all of these other groups that have come before us, evolution, in terms of evolution, have died out, and we have, like, as a species, can die out, and we are speeding our way there. I would say, all in pursuit of the shiny little baubles of capitalism and consumerism that are going to keep us occupied, so occupied that we're not going to notice the ways that we're treating the rest of the planet, the ways that we're speeding the collapse of ecosystems, of plant and animal populations. Some people, as a lot of Indigenous people will say, like, our non-human kin, because they are, we rely on them, and like, that's, at the end of the day, we need the earth. The earth doesn't need us. The earth is going to keep going, just like it's kept going throughout history. And the planet we live on is pretty amazing. Like, I don't know if you had a chance to look outside your window, wherever you are, I'm sure there's some kind of like something beautiful that you can look at and think and be like, wow, I'm so lucky that this is the only planet that we know of in the knowable universe that is like this, and we're here and we get to experience it. And so, like, it would be a shame if we as humans destroy so much of it so that it's not like this anymore, so that our planet becomes like Mars, where it used to have water, it used to have a different history, and now it's dust. And it would be a shame if we as humans continued on to that future instead of stopping where we are right now and reassessing and trying to maybe figure out a different path.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think. Oh no, Megan, you go. Trying.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, harkening back to your talking about how Native people just aren't really thought of, and I was, as I was like listening to you, I was like, they're almost talked about as past tense,
Mm-hmm.
like their history, like they don't exist. Was one of my thoughts. And then my other thought was when you were saying how it's kind of inverse in Canada and the United States. I actually had that exact thought while you were like, while I was reading the book. While I was reading the book, I was like, oh wow, I hadn't. But when I was thinking is I hadn't realized that the tensions that exist between white and black people in America are almost the tensions that kind of mirror the tensions between Native people and white people in Canada. And I just hadn't really like realized that. And so then when you said, yeah, it's like the inverse kind of like situation, it was like a light bulb moment for me. I don't know. I was like, wow, like I don't know. I never thought of it before, and that's something that I learned from your book, and that has kind of been sticking in my mind, and kind of goes back to what I was saying before about how we're just so caught up in our own world that we just don't think about people outside of it. And it's definitely something that I'm going to be looking into more, and like checking myself on of like I can't just be thinking about the issues that are like immediate to me. I need to sometimes like step out of that and like look at what's going on in the rest of the world. And that's definitely something that your book has inspired me to do, for sure. And this talk has inspired me to even more. It was kind of almost validating of like, you were thinking about looking into this, and then she mentioned it. Exactly what you were thinking. So the universe is trying to tell you something. Kateri, do you want to try?
Yeah, I think I'm clear now. Yeah, I think that all kind of comes around really well. I mean, we'll have to see, with this new election in America, but also like we were talking about with the pandemic, where we go from here, and hopefully, I feel like with the way we've set up our culture, our American culture, but just Western culture and capitalism in general, like you mentioned, the hamster wheel, it really stops us from, or recently has stopped us from being able to think of like the whys, like why are things this way? Like why do we see things this way? Why don't we question these things and like accept these things? For instance, of like you're talking about, Megan, which I was thinking as well, is the Native people aren't really here anymore, which is a big reason why I'm reading the book, The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee. The premise of the book is really to talk about the history from Wounded Knee on, because it's sort of like Wounded Knee is seen as this moment when Native American people kind of like cease to exist, like like everything else doesn't count, like it's not real Native American history, or like that's like my personal, that's not my opinion, but that's like how I feel like it's been portrayed. Like that's how I felt about it. So yeah, I think it's just about where do we go from here, and trying to rethink a lot of these incentives, and how we relate to each other and trust each other. And that's great. Okay. I feel like we definitely had some comments. So I'm going to throw some of them up. And thanks, Will, for checking in. Also, we had Kimberly, Logan. That'd be great. Loon Sapphire, that's a cool name.
That is a cool name.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. We need to hold our elected officials accountable. Absolutely. Looking 2021, hopefully will be the start of something new.
Yeah. Like, what would it be like if we did something, I don't know, like totally different than what we did before,
Yeah. Just
great.
Just go there. Just go for it. Just do something crazy, America. Try it.
Try caring for everybody. Who cares,
Yeah. I like this one. They are passionate about this country and the whole nation.
Yes.
Voices, because we were all waiting on the results. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, I think this is are so climate change oriented. Native American beliefs are so climate change oriented, and people look at it as past tense. Yeah. It's
Mm-hmm.
watched by a white man I've seen. Yeah. Yeah. So great conversation, everyone. This was, I mean, if you're not super stoked to read this book at this point, I don't know what else to tell you.
I'll hold up my little red one.
Yeah, your cute red one. I wonder how, is there like an underground book market of like being able to get covers from other countries just because
I mean, I feel like it's not a black market, it's just like Amazon.
Yeah. Right.
Like,
which is almost the same thing.
Yeah. Basically, yep.
Yeah. Before we like to ask this question, before you go, like, are there any other, is there anything else you're working on, first and foremost? And also, like, any other book recommendations in general, because we love to talk about books, obviously being a book club. You mentioned, for those of you who weren't here earlier, you mentioned Joan Didion, My Year of Magical Thinking. I've heard so much about this book, and it was actually, I think it was that book, or it was another book by Joan Didion that was quoted in a book we read like 2 months ago, and the writing was like
yeah, she's really smart.
She's a good writer.
And she's a very good writer, yes. So she's great. What I'm working on now, I'm working on like a lot of things right now, actually, because I just like, I don't know, I'm like in that zone where I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna finish this and then this and then this. I actually like weirdly started writing poetry, which is like only weird if you know me, and because I'm like, poetry is scary. I like respect it, but I can't be near it, and because I can't. And so like, I kind of like basically went through like a huge like life-changing event, and then like you know, I guess that's when you stereotypically start writing poetry. So that's when I started writing poetry. So I'm like finishing that. Then like I really have in my head, I want there to be 33 poems. And so I'm almost done with it. I'm at like 29. And so I have to finish that. And then I'm working on a novel, which had like been in the back burner for a really long time. Because it's just like, I don't know, it just keeps getting weirder and weirder. And now I have to like go back and rewrite from the beginning. It's like, oh my God, it's so weird. It's like part sci-fi, part autofiction, part like myth making and talking about like writing, and I don't know. It's
amazing.
It's a weird one.
Oh my gosh.
It's horror as well, and like psychological. Like it's wild. It's a wild thing. I see it in my head, and like now I just have to actually like get all the parts to work the way that I want them to. And then yeah, like I don't know. I guess I'm like working on like, I don't know, it's weird to say because everyone is just like, I don't know, when you're a literary writer, it's like you have to be literary stuff. But I'm actually working on a screenplay with my husband, which is like totally a very Hollywood type thing. That that like is fun. It's just fun. And so yeah, like it's just a fun thing to write. So
couple goals.
Yeah.
Well, we have like a little writing community on Wednesdays. If anyone in the chat is a writer, on Wednesdays on our Twitter page, and we try to do it on the Instagram. We just forget sometimes. We post like fun writing prompts. That's like the idea is like you get a prompt, sit down, write for 10 minutes, and post it. Like don't give a fuck, just do it. You know. So
yes, do it. Just do it.
Just do it, as in right. Great. So yeah, that's awesome. We'll keep an eye out.
The only book I would recommend, or I would recommend so many books, but the one I'm just thinking of right now is there's a book called Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead that I would recommend. It's a novel. It's really, really awesome. It's just kind of like, I don't know, it's so good. It's like basically the way that Josh always describes it is Johnny is like a glitter Indian princess who just like, you know, just like throws sparkle into the world. He's one of my favorite characters. My other favorite character is I don't know if you guys have read Son of a Trickster by Eden Robinson, but it's the start of a series. The second one is out. She's writing the third one, but it's just become a TV show, and I think it's coming to Shudder soon. She just signed a deal because it already was a CBC show in Canada. Now it's going to be on Shudder and other kind of things. It's really cool. We've like never had like, and like it's really cool because it's like kind of like I don't know, kind of horror, but kind of not. It's just really cool. It's just really cool. That's all I can say. It's just a really cool book where like, you know, this kid realizes that he's the son of a trickster. He's just an indigenous kid, and he realizes he's the son of a trickster, and then, you know, that sucks. So you find the ways it sucks.
Is it for adults?
It's kind of like, well, I would say they try to market it as YA, but I would say it's like you can pick it up as an adult and just like lose yourself in it. It's great. I don't know. I did give it to my son to read. I don't remember if he read it or not.
It sounds just like the Rick Riordan series books.
Which one?
What are they called? They're really popular. They're like the kids that are son of like Greek gods.
Oh my gosh! Yes, I know.
The Perseus
and the Olympic god.
Yeah.
And so what he's done, which is really cool, I think, those books were so popular that he created like, I don't know, like an imprint or something, like a side project where he's like now like giving book deals to people of different, like, I think the first one was to do with like Hindu mythology. So like different mythology, and they're kids books. Awesome. So it sounds like that.
So cool. Yes, I love that.
Yeah.
I actually love that you recommended a YA novel because we are huge. We're book nerds, and I feel like a lot of book nerds are like YA fans. Yes. So I actually love that. I mean, I said book nerds. It's like a surprise. We literally created a book club. But no, like I actually love that because Kateri and I are huge fans. We actually, our last book of the month was a YA novel.
Oh, that looks amazing.
Oh, I devoured it and immediately bought the sequel because I needed to know what happened.
Yeah, it's like
love that.
It's like zombies and like Reconstruction era, post Civil War era America. It's really, really like political, and it's super gutsy and like kind of gory, but like says a lot. And yeah, we loved this book. Like not even.
Oh, it looks so good. Also, I have to say, you keep your books very well. They all look so pristine. Nice.
I have like a ton of earmarks. That's my sin.
That's what I do too.
Yeah, and I annotate in pencil because I feel like pen is too violent.
Oh yes. I only like working in pens, so I've got pen stuff all over.
Me too. I have pen and highlighter. Like I have like I immediately opened up to like 5 highlights on one of the pages, like, and then I'll like write it in my notes app on my phone, and on your book alone, I already have like 15 pages of notes. So I'm like, oh my gosh, we need to talk about this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know about Kateri, but I would love to have you back sometime. I feel like you are this wealth of knowledge, and if you ever want to come back, we can make your dreams come true.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yes, I would love it. Keep in touch with me. You guys have my email. Just email. Hey, you gotta come over and like read this book, and we'll just all talk. Yeah.
Yes, it'll be like our new panel. It'll be a new segment. I'm always making up new segments. You can ask Kateri, like, we should do this.
Like, okay, and then
I have so many ideas. But social media and keeping in touch. I'm gonna throw this up for you guys. Follow Alicia on Twitter and on Instagram. Those are both of her usernames. Yeah. And one more time, here is the name of the book if you guys want to check it out. I believe we usually put the bookshop link We use
Yeah.
Bookshop so that way we're supporting indie bookstores.
Yes, I love it.
And then for those of you who aren't following us, you can find us on Twitter at YG Book Club and Instagram at Yanking Book Club. So yeah, I don't think we have any other housekeeping.
Yeah, just thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you guys so much for stopping by. This is one of the most interactive chats we've had in a while, so thank you for tuning in.
Yes, I love it. I'm gonna bring my dog over real quick.
Oh, yes,
He's
please.
just been like sitting in the back, being really cute. So he's just here. This is Sam. Hi, Sam. Say hi.
Oh, I would jump off the bridge for you.
He's like, I was just laying on the bed, Mom, and you just grabbed me. How rude. He went over there and staring at me.
Yeah, I just started these random chicks.
Love.
Yeah.
All right,
We
you
have
guys.
the running joke that Megan has Duke, and we love it when we see the tail go.
It's on.
But
I mean, you'll just see the tip of the tail.
or when
I
Megan's
love
cat,
it.
when Princess knocks off like something behind her camera, and it all out of nowhere, she's like, and she's like,
or she has been known to like stick her butthole right in the camera. Like, why, Princess? I do my thing.
She just has no shame. She's just like, let it all out.
yeah.
I'm a princess. What do I care? You're all peasants.
Yeah, she's yes, lots of appreciation. Well,
Got you,
yeah.
Mel. All right.
So I think we have to say goodbye. My husband is getting hungry.
Okay.
I know, I'm getting hungry too. My husband is making food. I can smell it. So,
Ooh,
I
food
know.
time.
Mine's not. He's like,
I'm sorry. Give me the husband.
Come on, Mom. Make the girls some lunch.
okay, we're gonna get good. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on. It was so lovely. And stay in touch. Yes.
Yes.
And,
You'll see us over. We have
yeah.
notifications on, so you'll see us.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
All right,
Cool.
guys. Thank you, guys. Goodbye.